With me now in studio is Yehuda Shaffer, the former Deputy State Attorney for Financial Crime, as well as our own diplomatic correspondent, Eli Hohenberg. Eli, we should note that Netanyahu made this announcement that he will have remarks to the media just a few hours ago. This is rather last minute. Any indication, perhaps, what issues he may touch on? And a good politician,
right,
but struggling in the polls. And speaking of Israel's election, big developments now in Israel's case 3000, better known as the submarine affair. It is perhaps the biggest, the most serious corruption probe in the history of Israel. It centers around the government's decision years ago to buy 3 state-of-the-art German subs from a particular German shipbuilder over the objections of some senior IDF brass who said the purchase was not necessary. Netanyahu is not a criminal suspect in this case, but many of his close advisors and family members even have been arrested for bribery and corruption, including top security officials and Netanyahu's own cousin. A key state's witness in this case, Ganor, he used to work for that German shipbuilder. He signed a deal with prosecutors to tell the full truth in exchange for immunity, and he said he bribed people in the Israeli defense community to secure the contract. But now, Ganor is retracting key parts of his testimony, telling police he actually lied 2 years ago and didn't bribe anyone. He now has been arrested for obstruction of justice. Back in studio with Yehuda Shaffer, former Deputy State Attorney dealing with financial crime. Sir, the retraction, does it hamper the investigation, any investigation? If someone confesses to doing something criminal, and then for whatever reason says, I lied, that wasn't the truth, does it hurt the investigation?
Well, of course, this is a dramatic development.
You went to the hospital after
Yes, but first, maybe we should say a few words about why we think, or how we can speculate about why this has been done now.
The motives, perhaps.
The motive. There's 2 things in the air. One is the money, tens of millions of dollars, which he has abroad, which he's been unable to put his hands on ever since he signed the agreement of being a state witness, because under the anti-money laundering laws that exist in Israel and abroad, this money would be considered or suspected as proceeds of crime, and the banks aren't letting him have his money.
Okay, so
he's been complaining about this and assisting help, and it's something he didn't calculate, I guess. The second reason, which might be even more interesting, is that the recent developments just a few days ago, when for the first time Netanyahu was sort of incriminated in some way into this affair,
yeah.
in where it turns out that we now know that he owned shares at the relevant period of a company which was a client of this ThyssenKrupp, who's suspected of bribing these Israeli officials, which for the first time brings Netanyahu into the picture. Now maybe Ganor, I'm just speculating here, but maybe Ganor is taking the advantage of the situation to maybe either try and cover up something bigger, or try and be the heroic savior of Netanyahu in some way, or...
But his testimony, it could still be used. I mean, it certainly hampers the investigation. It questions his credibility, but it's still a legal document. He signed sworn statements.
Yes, of course. Well, these kind of agreements are considered by the Israeli laws a necessary evil.
Yeah.
It's a necessary evil, because you're rewarding a villain. You're giving someone who's been part of the crime, you're letting him, in this case, not get out of jail free because he was committed to 1 year of imprisonment, but you're giving him a big benefit.
And
the bigger problem is that the testimony is questionable, because this person was involved in a crime, and therefore you need corroborating evidence. Now, sources from the investigation and the prosecution quoted in the press, the Israeli press, have said in the past that this guy, he gave testimony along weeks. This was the most detailed, documented testimony possible.
So it's been corroborated now?
It's been corroborated, and if it wouldn't be corroborated, there'd be no attempt to even indict on this basis. Now, what is done now, again, according to what we hear from the press, I haven't seen the materials, is that he's retracting not from the basic facts, but he's giving sort of a commentary and saying, no, these were not bribes, these were facilitation payments, or these were consultancy payments, or something like that.
Yeah.
This is not really that. It doesn't. I don't think it will really matter. There will be additional investigations needed to collect additional evidence.
And of course, uncover why now.
This will lengthen and perhaps complicate the process a little bit. But as a matter of law, it will be possible to bring his initial evidence for what it was, the parts that were corroborated into the courtroom.
Sure.
And there's an interesting precedent here. If I can just continue for one more minute, in the big, our biggest corruption case so far, the Holy Land case, against the President Ulmert, Prime Minister Ulmert, there was a very similar situation. Dechner, the guy who actually gave all the bribes there, he was a state witness, and he was standing on the stand and actually died while in the middle of a cross-examination. But when I was then in the prosecution, when we decided to indict him... I
was there as a journalist.
When we decided to indict him, we didn't indict along the full scale, all his stories. All his stories were not all of them were corroborated. We only indicted for those parts of his story which we found evidence in banking statements or in documents, etc., etc. So this will always be the case with these kind of witnesses who you do not believe because they were actually part of the initial crime.
A big twist in this case, and the investigation now is only intensifying to figure out the timing, the motive, and the next steps. Thank you, Yehuda, for that analysis. 5 or 6 minutes, and that's it. Back now in studio with our guests. I want to hammer in on what Netanyahu had to say. He really didn't talk.
Whether this more aggressive, offensive line of action will be working for Gantz, I don't know. Netanyahu continues with his
Netanyahu now live, leaving. Very quick remarks from Netanyahu. Yehuda, what are your thoughts here?
If I can just add to this, I think it was extremely interesting that he did not comment anything on the last few days' new findings with regard to case 3000.
And regarding his selling of the shares he had.
Because he relied in his speech, he relied only on the original decision of the AG not to clear him. AG then did not know that he owned stocks that were related to this customer of ThyssenKrupp, etc. He had a chance here to come out and say, A, B, and C, and D, this is nothing, it's one big misunderstanding, give his story, whatever. It's quite surprising. These days, the AG will have to, the Attorney General will have to decide if to reopen the case or investigate further, etc. He had a chance here to clear himself. He chose instead to rely on an old statement of the Attorney General, which is irrelevant because it was before we were aware of these new suspicions.
Are you surprised he didn't touch on the fact that he had these shares, whether he was a private citizen or not, or when he bought them or sold them? Are you surprised he didn't tread those waters?
I'm not a public relations expert, so maybe from a PR point of view, this was the right thing just to ignore it. But from a legal point of view, when the Attorney General might be contemplating to reopen the case against Netanyahu and think about checking further, he had a chance now to actually give a story, and an innocent man might have just chosen that chance and said, these are the facts, and it's nothing. And
just to know, the previous comments did deny those new suggestions.
Before his?
Yeah,
well,
on behalf of him.
But they were not detailed enough, and there was not. He had a chance here to do that, and I'm quite surprised actually he didn't.
All right, we'll leave it here. More analysis here on I-24 News on this important speech from Netanyahu, again attacking his main rival Benny Gantz for a lack of judgment over an alleged cell phone hacking. But again, another headline is the submarine affair, which continues to dominate headlines as well. Yehuda Shaffer and Eli Hulkenberg, thank you so much for sitting with me and providing your analysis.